Focus on Headline. All right, let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. For this, joining us in the studio, we have Kwon So-hwa and Chung Se-bom back in the studio with us. Guys, welcome back.
Hello.
Happy Friday.
Happy Fridays to you as well. Well, we're going to start things off with some news out of North Korea. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un inspected a fire assault drill, this of the Hwasong artillery unit. And who is with him? Well, we've been seeing her quite a bit on North Korean media. We're talking about his daughter, Kim Joo-ae. He stressed the need to overwhelmingly respond to any war preparations by the enemy. Sebum, start us off. What's the latest there?
Sure. According to North Korea's official Korean Central News Agency, Kim Jong-un inspected a fire assault drill of an artillery unit yesterday and stressed the need to overwhelmingly respond to any war preparations by its enemy. Multiple photos released by the news agency also showed that his daughter Kim Joo-ae was with him during the field guidance. According to the state news agency, the Hwasong artillery unit is charged with an important operational task of the Korean People's Army on the Western Front, and its leader Kim emphasized that the fire assault subunits should be strictly prepared for the greatest perfection in carrying out two strategic missions, deterring war and taking the initiative in war, by steadily intensifying various simulated drills for real war in a diverse way in different situations. Kim examined the actual war response posture of the 8th Fire Assault Company under the unit, which fired a volley at the targeted waters in the West Sea of Korea under the simulated conditions, implying that the drills were aimed at striking South Korea's military airfields in case of a war. And if you look at the photos released by the state news agency, the North appears to have test-fired at least 6 tactical guided weapons simultaneously. These tactical guided weapons are known to have similar capabilities to South Korea's KTSSM or Korean Tactical Surface-to-Surface Missile. On Thursday, South Korea's military said that the North fired at least one short-range ballistic missile towards the Yellow Sea from North Korea's western port city of Nampo at 6:20 p.m. Pyongyang's latest provocation came as the allies are preparing to kick off the Freedom Shield exercise from Monday to March 23rd. The exercise is to proceed with the large-scale field training exercise called the Warrior Shield.
Again, depending on what kind of military drill that North Korea conducts, it is a message towards a certain country. So when we talk about artillery drills, it is highly likely that that message is towards South Korea. Also, any short-range ballistic missiles, that's a message towards South Korea as well. If they do conduct, let's say, intermediate intercontinental ballistic missile or intermediate range ballistic missiles, it's sort of a message towards the United States. That's its longer range. As we get closer and closer to the Freedom Shield exercise, we are, of course, going to be seeing a lot more provocations from North Korea. In the meantime, reports say South Korea may have had some difficulties in detecting what the North calls this new tactical guided weapon. So tell us more about this.
Right. Such concerns have been raised given the time South Korea's military announced the North's launch on Thursday. At around 7:45 p.m., the Joint Chiefs of Staff said it detected one missile launched from North Korea's western port city of Nampo at 6:20 p.m. So that's 85 minutes after the firing, while usually the first statement is made immediately. And over 2 hours later, the JCS announced it's looking into the possibility of multiple SRBM launches. The JCS explained that the firing was detected in real time, but further analysis was needed as the detection time was extremely short. What the military implied is that the flight time itself was too short rather than that they lost track of the trajectory. Anyway, the concern is if the missile flies at a lower altitude than other SRBMs, it could escape South Korea-U.S. surveillance, diminishing the chance of a swift response. And I think it's also noteworthy that North Korea chose the middle of a lake as the launch site. It took its mobile launch vehicle to a point, to a reservoir about 10 kilometers north of Nampo to fire those tactical guided weapons. I think this is rare, but it did happen just last year in September. So yes, although we're talking about short-range ballistic missiles, if they're difficult to detect, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the more concerning news, I think, that are coming out right now because we've been saying, where the U.S. and South Korea has been saying that they have all the technology that's capable of detecting these missiles preemptively, and if anything, of course, comes towards South Korea, that it might be able to shoot it down. This is not one of those cases. But so you do make a very good point in that North Korea has been very creative in the way that they've been firing these ballistic missiles. And so, yes, this is not the first time that they have fired from a reservoir, which is not often, but they can kind of show that, hey, we could do this out of anywhere, and it's harder to detect when they're using a reservoir. There were cases where they've also fired from trains, right? They're like a moving train is what they're also doing. So it is it's tougher to sort of also detect where the source of these missiles are coming from. So North Korea, not to mention, this time it was at an evening time, but they have been known to start firing these missiles at like 1:30 a.m., 2:30 a.m. in random times. And so it is showing that they can pull off surprise attacks. Certainly a clear message from North Korea is what we're seeing. We're going to move on here, I'm sure, as the Freedom Shield exercise will be conducted this month. We will get more, I'm sure, news of provocations from the North. Moving on, the South Korean government has appealed a court order to compensate a Vietnamese victim of civilian massacre by South Korean soldiers during the Vietnam War. We have talked about this previously, but we got some updates. So let's get the details.
All right. It's Eun Nguyen Thi-tan who filed a suit in 2020 against the South Korean government seeking about 30 million won in compensation. She said she had lost her family members and suffered wounds when South Korean soldiers killed about 70 civilians in her hometown in Vietnam's central province of Quang Nam in 1968. In February, the Seoul Central District Court ordered the Korean government to pay her 30 million won, including money for the delay in compensation. It marked the first legal acknowledgement of South Korea's liability for atrocity during the war. About 300,000 South Korean troops fought alongside U.S. forces during the Vietnam War. However, the South Korean government has appealed a court order by submitting the petition on Thursday. Seoul said that her claims of damage have not been fully substantiated. About the appeal, Vietnam's foreign ministry spokesperson said it is extremely regrettable.
Yeah, so we've mentioned this in that it came at a time when South Korea is also, although we have a solution or a resolution from the South Korean government in the compensation of the forced laborers. But initially, when this had come out, the forced labor resolution had not been solved just yet. But this is one of those things where it can't be where you are seeking compensation or you're seeking apology from one country, but if you also did the wrong and deny any kind of compensation or any kind of apologies for another country. So this does not put South Korea at a very good image right now. And I think the consensus at this time is if South Korea is also part of this past wrongdoings, they need to respond to it properly, compensate them properly, also issue the proper apologies. And so this appeal right now definitely does not good when for years South Korea has been seeking sort of the same thing from Japan, right? We're going to move on this time over to China, where President Xi Jinping this Friday gained an unprecedented third term as the leader of the country on the occasion of the country's two sessions parliamentary meeting. So let's get the details of this.
Right. President Xi Jinping's presidency was officially endorsed for the third time in a row by the country's political elite during a ceremonial vote this Friday at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. This solidifies Xi's role as state chairman for another 5 years. The National People's Congress members voted 2,952 2-0 for Xi's appointment. Needless to say that we're talking about China's rubber stamp parliament. Xi was also formally reappointed as chairman of the Central Military Commission. And after his appointment, he made a public pledge of allegiance to the Constitution. Now, these appointments are not a big surprise. Xi himself broke the tradition of handing over power once in a decade to the next leader and changed the Constitution that calls for a two-term limit. So the 69-year-old might hold power for the rest of his life. A reshuffle of other roles in the leadership is also taking place. One big appointment expected on Saturday. Li Chang, one of Xi's most trusted officials, is predicted to take the role as premier following Li Keqiang.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different political system that China has, and it is very similar to what Russian President Vladimir Putin has done as well, where he's sort of changing the constitution, putting no limit on the number of terms that the leader of the country could go. And so the consensus right now is, yes, Xi Jinping will have 5 years in this third term. And there is another good chance that 5 years later on, they might do another vote, and then he's going to get another 5 years, and that's going to be 4 terms. Really is unprecedented. But again, China does have a very different political system compared to some of the other countries, democratic countries out there. In the meantime, President Joe Biden proposing a record defense budget for the fiscal year 2024. This is to boost deterrence in the Indo-Pacific region while containing the growing influence of China and Russia. Sebum, tell us more about this.
Sure. U.S. President Joe Biden proposed a record defense budget of $842 billion for fiscal 2024, up by 3.2% from the previous year. The administration issued only limited details, but spotlighted $9.1 billion in proposed investments for the Pentagon's Pacific Deterrence Initiative, meant to bolster U.S. force posture in the region amid increasing tensions with China. The White House stressed that this budget is to contain China and Russia and to counter other persistent threats, including those posed by North Korea, Iran, and violent extremist organizations. The request includes $170 billion for Pentagon weapons procurement and $145 billion for research and development, as well as $37.7 billion to continue modernizing the U.S. nuclear arsenal. President Joe Biden wrote in an accompanying message to Congress that it outlines crucial investment to outcompete China globally and to continue support for Ukraine in the face of unprovoked Russian aggression. The budget proposal pledges $6 billion to support Ukraine and $753 million for Ukraine's energy and cybersecurity. Regarding cybersecurity as well, the White House made it clear that it will continue its investments in cybersecurity programs to protect the country from malicious actors and activities. In the U.S., unlike Korea, Congress has the authority to formulate and deliberate budget bills. Biden's budget proposal is not legally binding, but Congress will take it as an important reference when finalizing the budget bill for the next fiscal year.
Yeah, so this was, again, quite strategic for U.S. President Joe Biden in that, as you know, just like here in South Korea, there is quite a bit of a rift between the two main parties. In the United States, we have the Republicans and the Democrats here, and there is always going to be some kind of clash with the Republicans saying, no, we're not going to pass some of these budgets from the Congress level. But they've added key countries here. They've added China. They've mentioned North Korea. They've mentioned Iran. They've mentioned Russia. These are the 4 countries that even the Republicans are going to be on hand with, right? I mean, we talked about in the past how, despite the fact that like the Democrats and the Republicans are always fighting, if there's anything related to like some kind of resolution or bill related to kind of like countering China and stuff like that, for some reason, they're always on the same page. And so they've added that, and then they snuck in there, of course, the issue regarding Ukraine. Now, the Republicans have been sort of against continuing to put assistance into Ukraine and things like that. But when you have an entire budget in itself and it has the main gist of it is countering China, Russia, and Iran and North Korea, and then putting Ukraine in there, it is going to be... I guess it's going to be easier to pass. I'm not going to say it's going to be easily passed, but it's going to be much easier to pass. So interesting move here. But of course, looking at this, and this is for fiscal year 2024, if they're saying that they're going to continue to pledge money and support for Ukraine, another $6 billion. But that probably shows that they think that this war in Ukraine is going to probably go into next year as well. So not really good news on that front. Guys, let's move on to something else, that an area where we certainly haven't been getting a whole lot of good news. This is the domestic economy. South Korea has logged a record current account deficit in the month of January. This amid a sharp drop in exports. We've been talking about this. So let's get the latest figures on this.
Sure. Korea's current account deficit in January was above $4.4 billion US dollars as a result of sluggish exports and a hike in outbound tourism. According to preliminary figures released by the Bank of Korea on Friday, the nation's current account deficit in January was $4.52 billion, which is down from a $2.68 billion surplus a month earlier. And this marks the biggest monthly current account deficit since related data was compiled in January 1980. And it's attributed mostly to a rapid deterioration of the goods balance brought on by declining exports and growing imports, fueled by higher spending. Export plunged 14.9% in January to $48 billion. So that's a drop for the fifth consecutive month. And going into some of the details by sector, the outbound shipments of chips dropped 43.4%. Steel was down by 24%. Chemical industrial products, 18.6%. And if we also take a look at the regions to which South Korea exports, but in which exports have been dropping a lot, the figure has been down 31.4% when it comes to exports to China. And to Southeast Asia, 27.9% drop. That was interesting, I thought, because I think in the past years we had better figures when it comes to the ASEAN countries.
Yeah, ASEAN exports have been declining a lot recently.
And also to Japan, a drop by 12.7%. Imports went up by 1.1% to $55.5 billion, especially cars. Imports went up by 65.9% and grains by 6.1%. But if there's some relief in sight, it's that figures from earlier this month showed the nation's trade deficit was posted at $5.3 billion compared to the record $12.65 billion in January. It hints to an improvement in the current account. And the nation's finance ministry vowed that the government would continue efforts on improving exports and also find ways to bolster domestic travel.
So I think right now the current government, their plan is to diversify their export portfolio, right? But and by export portfolio, we're not just talking about the items to export, like for example, military goods. I mean, that's one thing that I think they're really trying to really boost. But the number of countries in which they're exporting these goods to, right? And so you're showing, I mean, there is a pattern here clearly that we are seeing this huge deficit in export figures because China is a big part of it. And when you're seeing that China exports to China is declining that much, and we were hoping that now that China is reopening their economy, that the export figures are going to improve over the next few months. But at the same time, we have to take into consideration like all those the CHIPS Acts, and then all these measures that the U.S. administration is trying to put on the Chinese the exporting of the semiconductor chips to China and things like that. Can South Korea really afford to lose China as a major trading partner is the big question, especially nowadays. They're also talking about South Korea joining the Quad as a working group. There's even talks about South Korea, after kind of joining them as a working group, to potentially have permanent membership of the Quad, that essentially then the trading partnership between South Korea and China might be done and over with. So this whole deficit is going to continue on. But I do find it quite interesting that there is also part of the account deficit is due to the outbound tourism, right? A lot of people are traveling out to other countries and not spending money here, right?
Including someone in the studio recently.
Yeah, that's me.
Is that you?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, you just came back from somewhere, right?
Did some shopping over there.
A lot.
How dare you? You need to use that money to revitalize
true.
the Korean economy. Spend the money here in Korea. I don't know where country you went to, but you revitalized that country. No, yeah,
Friends.
Sincere apology.
I don't know how much money she spent, but I'm sure it's like barely a dent into that economy there. But yeah, certainly, that's the other negative drawback, and I do find it quite interesting that more and more people, but also on the flip side, are people going to be coming in, and then another big chunk of the economy being tourism, the Chinese tourists coming in, right? But at the same time, if you have these, the tensions with China moving forward and relations with China sours, and there is no people-to-people exchanges with Chinese tourists coming into South Korea, in the long term, that's also going to be a negative impact. So all of this is something that we need to take into consideration.
I think, however, Esther, you mentioned that Korea is trying to diversify the countries it exports to.
Yeah.
But I think as the entire global economy is on the downhill, it's more of the sectors that we have, the different sectors we have to think of. As you said, for instance, on the back of the war in Ukraine, our military exports could boost in the coming years. Although I don't want them to boost because of the Ukraine war, but it can be a growth momentum.
Yeah, but it's like
being. And
also much, I think, military equipments and military vehicles that they can export at this time, because South Korea is kind of relatively new in this sector right now, right?
And also, I think the service industry could become the next, bigger growth engine than semiconductors in cars like in the past.
Really? Bigger than the semiconductors? The big thing right now, I think, is the semiconductor exports that's been lagging, because it's not just the demand that's diminishing, but also for example, for like car chips, there is a lack of car chips. So even if they want to sell it, they can't sell it right now. And it comes to car vehicles, it's been up. People wanted to buy Hyundai and Kias, but that's only kind of sort of popular like in the United States, whereas in like Europe, I looked at the latest figures. EVs are still dominated by, for example, like Mercedes-Benz. China has like, what is it, their BYD or something like that. That's like the biggest EV market at this time, number one. And so they're not going to be importing any South Korean vehicles. So there's a limit to how many countries can actually purchase this. And that's the big problem is, how else can you diversify the portfolio other than just cars, semiconductor chips, and military equipment, right? So
K-wave contents.
Well, yeah, and certainly that was like the one sector that seemed like a huge plus, right, recently. But even that, can they really turn the entire South Korean economy over? I don't think it's big enough just yet. Something that we haven't looked at for quite a bit is the stocks exchange. Let's look at the Korean stock and the foreign exchange markets as well. Someone, what's the latest on this?
Okay. Seoul stocks closed lower for a third straight sessions today as investors faced renewed fears over faster rate hikes by the Federal Reserves. The benchmark Kospi had inched down 23.64 points or 0.98% to 2,395.45 as of 9:27 a.m. and closed the session at 2,394.59, down by 29.27 points or 1.01%. Foreign and institutional investors sold a net of 562 billion won, while retail investors purchased a combined net of 511.9 billion won. The local currency closed at 1,324.2 won against the US dollar, down by 2 won from the previous session's close. Overnight, Wall Street closed sharply down after jobless claims show that the U.S. labor market is still resilient, casting uncertainty over the Federal Reserve rate hike path. The S&P fell 1.85%, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dipped 1.66%, and the tech-focused Nasdaq Composite declined 2.05%. Investors are also awaiting U.S. job data due later in the day, which will set the overall tone for the Fed's monetary tightening direction.
Yeah, so far, I think they had some preliminary economic data coming from the United States, and they would say that it was surprisingly, it was a lot stronger than what they had expected, right? And so that was on the back of that, U.S. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell came out saying that, look, I think we need to start jacking up the interest rates a lot faster and a lot more aggressively. And so hinting at possibly a 50 basis point interest rate hike come the March 21st to 22nd FOMC meeting. But if the job data comes out and says that the job market doesn't look as good, because that's the other drawback, is because some of the senators, when they were questioning Jerome Powell, they're saying, look, if you start raising these interest rates too high, that the job market is going to go down, the unemployment rate is going to go up. And so this is the big thing right now. And I think judging by how good or bad the employment figures are in the United States, I think they're still going to bring it up, but it's a matter of 25 basis point or 50 basis points. So if the job market looks like it's much better than what they had anticipated, you're going to expect a 50 basis point hike. If it's going to be not so good, they're going to be a little bit more cautious and put 25 basis points. But nevertheless, the big thing right now is South Korea. The South Korean central bank just cannot keep up with the U.S. central bank. And so you're seeing a larger gap here. There's some consensus saying that by the end of this year, the United States, U.S. Fed, could see a benchmark interest rate in the 6% range. Can South Korea close that gap? It's highly unlikely, especially with the record household debt that people are facing right now. And so what happens? Then the U.S. dollar goes up. The Korean won is going to depreciate further. The stock market is going to crash. I shouldn't say crash, but it's going to be pretty bad here in South Korea. And so you're looking at all of this, and which is why we take a look at very closely at what the U.S. Fed does. So I think especially economists here in South Korea, they're looking at this March 21st, 22nd FOMC meeting very, very closely, because that is going to be the start of what you can expect in the 2023 year and the decisions that the U.S. Fed is going to be making. So a lot of concerns on that front. Let's move on to sports here. Speaking of concerning, I can't believe I was going to say baseball is in the air, but for many baseball fans here in South Korea, yesterday's game might have been a little bit upsetting, maybe some disappointment. But hey, that's Australia. When it comes to Japan, South Korea is going to be, for some reason, the South Korean athletes just turn into a different player when they end up playing their rivals, Japan. About 30 minutes from now, South Korea will be facing off against the world number one ranked Japan in the World Baseball Classics Pool B game. This is going to take place at the Tokyo Dome. So Japan has the home field advantage. And this is a must-win situation for South Korea. If they don't win, they're virtually out of the group stages right off the bat here. So Soa, who is a baseball expert here on Arirang.
Are you kidding? Yes, you are.
So the top baseball analyst and expert on our program here will be giving us more on this. What do you have for us?
Well, sure. Well, I'm really not really an expert in sports, but I see that there are some people are already getting excited. I see Joshua Lee wrote, hello, everyone, South Korea versus Japan in less than 30 minutes.
Yes.
So I guess I can imagine that this Friday night, many people will be in front of the screens, either to watch the new season of The Glory or this WBC game, because Korea versus Japan is always a much anticipated match, no matter what sports event, especially after Korea's 8-7 defeat to Australia yesterday. Now, if Korea loses in today's game, which starts at 7 p.m. at the Tokyo Dome, it won't get to the next round, as SJ mentioned. Now, Team Korea will have to win to advance to the quarterfinals. That could be either as first or second in the rank, depending on Japan and Australia's later game. Japan, the host of this year's games, and current world number one and two-time WBC champion, currently is widely seen a strong favorite to reach the quarterfinals in Pool B, which consists of South Korea, Japan, China, Australia, and the Czech Republic. Now, on Thursday, Japan swept a 8-1 win over China. So this is going to be a pretty stressful game for Korea this Friday, not only because Japan is Korea's arch rival, but it's really up to this game whether we move on or not. However, despite the world ranking, Korea is currently the fourth. There were a number of times the country beat Japan in the past. And also South Korean pitcher Kim Kwang-hyun of SSG Landers, who has experiences with facing Japan, and also with leading Korea to victory in games with Japan, will be out in the field. He's also got the most experience in international games in the current team. Korea had beaten Japan, meanwhile, in the WBC in 2006, 2009, also at the 2008 Beijing Olympics, and 2015 in the Premier 12. Now, the manager of Korea's team, Lee Gang-chul, said, quote, I felt we needed a veteran pitcher to set the tone in early innings. And he added that although the Japanese players also know Kim very well, he just had to go with someone with his level of experience. And then he added his hopes that he's going to get his job done. Meanwhile, Japan's starting pitcher will be Yu Darvish of San Diego Padres.
Yeah, so
how was my sports report?
It was pretty good. Yeah, it was as good as it can get from someone from Germany, and Germany is not a powerhouse when it comes to baseball, right?
Oh,
no, it's not. I mean, football.
Okay,
it took football. I mean, Germany's a powerhouse, but no, it's going to be tough. And I think one of the things that a lot of people have been talking about is, this team does not have like the firepower that it used to have back in the days. You mentioned like the World Baseball Classic in 2006 and 2009, the Beijing Olympic Games and the Premier 12. Yeah, guys like, Lee Dae-ho, and you had guys like Lee Seung-yup. I'm going to sound like really old right now, but these are guys who are retired now. But you have a lot of these young players, and I've said from the very start that despite some people saying that this is the strongest Korean national team on paper, I said I disagree. That's not true. Maybe they're a little bit more talented. There's bigger names, and that's only because players are more recognizable. But the shame with this is that there is a reason why baseball became so big here in South Korea, and that's because of the 2008 Beijing Olympic Games. And when they beat Cuba for the gold medal, there was a boom in baseball, and everybody was going out watching baseball, and the football was no longer the most popular sport in here in South Korea. And so one of the effects that you're also going to see from the lack of winning or lack of success in these international events is that less and less people are going to end up going to the games. And so that's unfortunate for the domestic league, to be honest with you. But we'll see what happens. Again, the game is going to kick off in about 25 minutes time. And, there's always miracles, but you never know. We'll talk more sports. This is the other sporting arena that I'm a big fan of. And this time, Sebom, who is the expert in this sport, International Skating Union's World Short Track Speed Skating Championships is going to be held in South Korea for the first time in 7 years. This starting today, all the way until the 12th. Sebom, who has probably no experience in speed skating, but is our speed skating expert for now. You have more on this.
All right. The World Short Track Speed Skating Championships will be held from today to March 12th at Mukdong Ice Rink in Yangcheongu District, Seoul. It's been 7 years since Korea held the world's second largest short track event. About 300 athletes from 34 countries will compete, and the Korean national team consists of 10 members, including Choi Min-jung, last year's gold medalist, and Park Ji-won, the world's number one in the ISU World Cup ranking. And this morning, Park Ji-won made a good start by taking first place in the men's 1500 meters preliminary group 3 with a record of 2 minutes 17.007 seconds. With this, he successfully reached the semifinals, and not only him, Lee Jun-seo and Hong Kyung-hwan also settled in the semifinals in groups 4 and 7, respectively. For the women's 1500 meters, Kim Gil-lee Choi Min-jung and Kim Gun-hee easily passed the preliminaries and advanced to the semifinals. For the next few days, athletes will compete with each other for 9 gold medals, including the men's and women's 500, 1,000, and 1,500 meters, and the team relays are the men's 5,000, women's 3,000, and mixed 2,000 meters.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's, South Korea is a powerhouse when it comes to short track, and if you've noticed, there's only... unless you're like a super fan of short track, and I'm going to be honest with you, I'm a every 4-year fan when it comes to short track. I just watch the Winter Olympic Games, and I'll be cheering on for Team Korea and things like that. There's only a couple of names that people will probably recognize, and that's Choi Min-jung, and also Lee Jun-seo, I think is the other name that people might know. But that shows how competitive, I think, to join the national team. That's like archery, right? They were saying like to make it as a national team archer for South Korea, it's tougher than winning the Olympic Games. And it's sort of like with the short track team here. So again, for our listeners out there, I'm sure, hopefully we'll get some more updates on this, and Team Korea will be able to win a bunch of gold medals, especially when you have Park Ji-won as the world number 1 in the ISU World Rankings. All right, guys, thank you very much for your reports today, especially your great jobs as sports reporters for the day. Have a safe weekend, and we'll see you guys again next time.
Thank you.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang radio application, or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.